greetings. I'm here in the car, so I again apologize about the sound. Several people have asked me over the years, how do you have this job, you read all these books, how do you find time to make videos? And the answer is I record them in my car or at work, and I keep the time. I just do it when I have a moment, and I'm driving back to work from Michigan to West Virginia. I just got the call this morning and to pack up, and now it's about a 10-hour drive to get there. So this is an excellent time to record a video or two. I think at least just one. So I want to talk about the issue of child pornography again. Now, the reason is not because child pornography is like my favorite issue or anything. I really don't consume porn generally. I've never paid for any. I've never found it that appealing. I've always kind of, I don't want to get too personal here, but I've always been satisfied with my own imagination in that regard. So that's not like I feel like I have a dog in this fight per se. But I think there are some very pertinent issues about the concept of autonomy and rights generally, and child rights. And I don't want to get into a debate here about rights. I'm using that term colloquially, I guess. But the main reason I feel like I should make a follow-up video is because there was so much discussion and disagreement, and there's some acrimony too on that video. There very much is a kind of preaching to the choir aspect to my channel and most libertarian channels, most channels generally. I don't think that's just libertarians, where it's a lot of head nodding, which that's cool. But when you come to an issue then where you don't get a lot of head nodding, and in fact there's rather emphatic disagreement, I think that means that more discussion is warranted. So I'd like to respond to some of the comments made, not specifically, but some of the reactions to that video and to the idea. And the reactions range from full-scale agreement to child pornography is just a-okay, and even a human right, to it's okay in qualified circumstances that are to varying degrees met or not met by the group so-called of children, and then to outright total rejection and downright mean-spirited being against. So, and not mean-spirited, I won't even say that, just very much in disagreement with. So there's a couple points. Several people discussed the idea that children are not physically developed to the point where they can engage in pornography, that pornography would scar them physically forever, never mind mental scarring. There's a couple problems with that. One, by the age of 13, 14, most people are actually physically capable of normal sexual activity. If you want to take it to the extreme and say, could they maybe survive the indulgences of King Joffrey? No, but relatively normal sexual functions. I knew girls who were having kids when they were 13, 14, at my school. And so it's clearly not impossible for kids, and guys, it depends on the guy, but, they become capable of sex at an age that is somewhat earlier than what most people consider, reaching adulthood. I just caught my eye because there's a state cop driving by. Oh, hello, officer. I was recording a video on child pornography. That's why I was speaking. It depends, what you want to call kids in. If you're going to say the line is 18, well, that's ridiculous. Almost all people, unless they have some kind of unusual physical trait, are going to be capable of normal sexual activity by the time they're 18. And well before that, actually. Now, the other problem is that porn is a little bit more broad than just plain sex. There's a lot of money made showing just videos of so-called solos, which is essentially just masturbation. So, as in one person masturbating to themselves. There are people who make money doing that, recording that. I don't see how there's any age where that is at least physically damaging or impossible. You know, emotionally, psychologically, that's harder to argue. Touching with other people. Not all pornography basically requires penetration of any type. By that type of pornography, I don't think is even going to be physically limited to the pubescent or the prepubescent or the postpubescent. So there's that. And I highly doubt that people making this claim would then say, well, yeah, okay, 15-year-olds, that's fine. Even though they physically could do it. I think that they tend to all will say, no, it's got to be 18 or 21 or whatever. One commenter was saying they have to be 25 and have secular and very, very rigorous sex education. That argument I think is kind of silly. Another argument that was raised is, well, sex is risky. They could get pregnant. They could get a disease, and so it shouldn't be allowed. Again, this is not necessarily implied. The type of activity that happens does not necessarily have to risk that. Not all pornography requires the exchanging of seeds. Just in the back of my mind, I'm of course always thinking about gay pornography, in which case the chance of impregnation is zero. The chance of disease exists, but this argument is not specific to children. It's a correct argument, but it's not specific to children, because adults can get venereal disease. In fact, I don't think they have any added protection against it. They can get pregnant, they can ruin their life, they can regret having had sex for any number of reasons, even if there's no immediate proximate negative externality. Even if there's not a pregnancy or an STD, they might feel really bad about it and even clinically depressed. Does that mean then we should not allow sex ever? I don't think so. So I don't see how that argument, while true as far as it goes, is applicable to children specifically. Now, the most, I think, pertinent and relevant and meaningful argument is one that kind of says, all right, children shouldn't have autonomy because they're incapable of, really exercising it. And there's even kind of a cynical someone saying, oh, just because a child says that they're giving their consent, that should be completely ignored because they can be coerced into saying that. Well, or manipulated into saying that. Well, again, that's true. It's possible to coerce or manipulate a child into saying something, just as it's possible to coerce or manipulate an adult into saying something. Now, whether it's easier or harder, that's a different question. But then I don't think we could say, let's abolish autonomy for everyone, because there's a chance, however great that chance is, that they're not really exercising their autonomy. They're being coerced or manipulated by some third party. I think that the reaction to that is, absent some compelling evidence that they are actually being manipulated or coerced, the default is to assume that they're not. We don't go around categorically rejecting the assertions of adults because there's a chance that they're being coerced. I mean, even if you don't see a gunman there, there's always the possibility that the mafia or the government has kidnapped their relatives or their family or some piece of property and is blackmailing them, and you just don't see any evidence of it right up. So that doesn't mean, though, that we then assume that, hey, we have to worry about whether this is really autonomy, and even to the point of assuming that it's not legitimately them asserting their rights, that it's something else. And I don't see why that skepticism needs to be applied, at least categorically and necessarily, to children. So defined. I am cognizant of the fact and receptive to the idea that for some people, and I say people, not children, for some people, there are legitimate questions about their ability to make decisions for themselves, their ability to be a moral agent, to make volitional acts. That's a legitimate concern. But I don't see how that can be tied to an age necessarily. There's a bell curve, so how many 1-year-olds can demonstrate their autonomy legitimately? Probably none, or it's hard to imagine how. 2-year-olds, probably not. You start to get to 3-4-year-olds, they start to assert that, and it's kind of ridiculous to assume that every time they do, it's not them asserting their will, but it's the autonomy of somebody else being exercised through their motions, through their kineticism. And the older you get, the less plausible this becomes. I think by the time you get to like 10, 11, 12, there's a serious possibility that kids are able to gauge cause and effect, moral agency, the rights of others, the rights of themselves. Their ideas about time preference. Their time preference is low enough that they don't make decisions that they're going to regret within 10 minutes necessarily. But I am I'm receptive to the idea of generating some kind of rubric to decide whether a person is really a moral agent. But if we were to develop such a rubric, many people who are not adults would not pass, or many people who are, many children would not be able to pass, and many adults would not be able to pass. And it should be noted here that the class of people called children, quote unquote, and if we're going to define that from born babies, forgetting for now, prenatal fetuses, or preborn babies, born from the time of birth until whether you draw the line at 18, 16, 15, that group of people is physiologically, developmentally, and mentally the most diverse group of people on the planet. I mean, you've got people in that group ranging from a couple pounds, to hundreds of pounds, fully adult in almost all respects. I mean, there's some brain changes that continue, but brain changes continue into geriatric life as well. So I don't, that's, all kinds of shapes, sizes, developments. It's literally the most diverse category you can draw based on age. The difference between a 0-year-old or a half-year-old and an 18-year-old is far greater than the difference between a 20-year-old and a 100-year-old. At least, I'm not a biologist, so maybe I'm wrong about that, but it seems to me that it's not just dimorphic. There's enormous morphological changes between that category. Now, if you narrow what you define as children chronologically, then that difference becomes less. So if you consider kids 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, it's less than if you consider them going all the way to 18 or 15 or whatever. But there are any rubric we come out that's going to gauge cognitive ability and measure if people are able to assert moral authority, moral relevancy. There's going to be a lot of quote-unquote children who can pass that test, in which case the objection that they can't do porn because they can't consent or whatever is nullified, because if you develop a rubric to decide who can consent and who can't, then if kids can pass it, then they can pass it, and you can't claim that those kids anyway, never mind the kids who can't pass, they can't give consent because syllogistically they can. And I don't like it seems incredibly arbitrary to just say, well, you can't do it until you're 18 or 16 or whatever, because why is that significant? It's you're using that as a stand-in and say, well, it's significant because they're developmentally unable to make decisions. I'm like, well, no, let's actually measure the ability to make decisions. Now, I have qualms about this that are not, it's not that they can't be overcome, but there are serious reservations I have, and that is, what we're talking about here is some kind of legal precedent or legal rule or societal norm whereby people can be stripped of their autonomy and their rights and their volition and their ability to be, well, their autonomy essentially. That's extremely significant, and the potential for abuse is very high. And this goes into other issues like institutionalization, the infirm, the crazy people, all that sort of thing. This is a relevant topic on that as well. I am very, very cautious about erring on the side of not depriving somebody of their rights unduly. I don't want to err on the side of we're not really sure, so let's strip them of their rights and make them essentially subhumans, who are under the control of either their parents or the state or some other element of society. They essentially become slaves, subhuman or non-human category of life. And I'm very hesitant to extend that definition very wide. This is the same reason I'm against abortion. I'm willing to hear a debate about what is and is not a person and to adjust my views accordingly, but I am very reluctant to start committing homicide on entities that could be considered humans. Like I said, I'm open to debate, but I'm going to err on the side of not committing homicide. I know maybe that sounds radical to some people, and I'm going to err on the side on not eliminating the rights of this or that person. Again, I'm receptive to a rubric, but that's a consideration. I'm not going to say it's a test or a categorical imperative. It's just it's a strong consideration on my part, and I think a justifiable one. I think it's one that people should consider. And there's other interesting aspects of this. All these people who cry foul about it does harm to the children. Unless they're an activist, I have a hard time taking them seriously. Now, most of the libertarians on my circumcision video were pretty much agree that it's a bad practice. But I have a hard time saying, oh yeah, you can't have a blowjob with your buddy and get paid for it, but your parents can cut off your foreskin. No big deal. And that attitude is still pervasive, and I don't understand why. I've posted about circumcision on homosexual Reddit accounts before, and the reaction was largely negative to the point of it was considered propaganda that I would even consider opposing circumcision. I wonder how many of those guys would oppose child pornography on the claim that it does physical damage, even though that's certainly not necessarily the case. That's just another, and that is a very similar issue because you're talking about the rights of the children. Because you're basically saying, for those who are against the autonomy of children, they don't have autonomy. So if their parents want to cut them up, so be it. That's the parents' right to do that. In which case, it seems odd that they wouldn't then be able to, use the child to generate revenue pornographically. Since the child, after all, doesn't have the right to object or have any consideration to its wishes or potential wishes when it comes to circumcision, then it shouldn't have any consideration when it comes to, it's even conceivable that this would be used for the demonstrable interests of the child. Some poor family could go, we're going to take our kid, we're going to take him to the local child porn studio, and we're going to start a college account with the money we raise, which, by the way, the money you can raise doing porn can be not insignificant. I know a guy who is now a millionaire who started doing gay porn when he was in his late teens. He doesn't do it anymore. He doesn't have to. He was able to retire by the time he was 26, I think. And he lives in a mansion in Denver now and owns a whole bunch of real estate. So it is plausible, if not necessarily always going to happen, that parents can say, we're going to have our child perform in child porn. He might regret it later, but he'll make money, and that's, he'll be able to pay for his college or whatever. And I have a hard time taking seriously somebody who's going to say, that's wrong, but we can cut off the foreskin. Well, the child might regret that later too, but who cares? That's a direct mutilation of their genitals, and that's okay. It's funny how widely considered that's okay, but child porn is not considered okay. That's kind of a crossover issue to consider. And it's not just a crossover. It's the same issue, the autonomy of children, and for that matter, all people, or any people where there's a question of their ability and or right to exercise volition. So there's that. And there's other things. The select indignation. I think there are other institutions within our society that are far more harmful to children that I don't hear cry about. The public school system does enormous harm to children. At the very least, it retards their development. You have the welfare system. You have, and people talk about incorrectly, like, well, what about? Doesn't this create perverse, not to use a double entendre, a perverse incentive where if we were to allow it, then unscrupulous, pornographic producers would, take advantage of children. They would have a strong incentive to try and manipulate kids to agree to do pornography. And I agree that possibility exists, that's a danger. Although I disagree to then say we should then categorically reject all proclamations by children that what they're doing is voluntary, because just because it can be abused doesn't mean that that's necessarily what's happening. But right now the government is basically creating much more child abuse through its welfare programs, and could conceivably be caused by kiddie porn. The most basic of which, and I'll quote Herbert Spencer here, is the government subsidizes women to have many bastards. They say you have a kid out of wedlock, you raise him without a father, which is the single biggest factor you can think of that causes negative consequences for the child, and the government is subsidizing it. They're paying women a bounty essentially for how many bastards they have, and then if they get married, they say, oh no, you don't get any money now. That's doing a whole hell of a lot more harm to children and society generally than porn is, and I don't see near the selective indignation. Child porn is so demonstrably horrible and evil, and yet stuff that's actually far worse is socially acceptable, whether we're talking about circumcision, welfare, or public schools, and there are probably others I could name. Again, the more puritanical people, and it's odd how the puritanical people can often be liberals and conservatives. Conservatives are guilty here too. Can say a 17-year-old who can join the Marine Corps and go fight in Iraq can't do pornography. I think there's also, this is interesting as well, and maybe I'm way off base, maybe my personal experiences are totally aberrant, and this is something I'd be interested in people commenting on. Children are not asexual beings. I mean, there is less gender dimorphism with young children. There's not as big a difference between boys and girls when they're younger. As they age, as they go through puberty, there becomes a much more dimorphic difference between the sexes. But that does not mean that children are not ever sexual beings, and that they might not, in some cases, actually enjoy what are more or less overt sex acts. I think that this is controversial, but I think that if it is, it's because somebody's in denial. This is like my experience as a kid were that sexual experiences with yourself and with other kids did happen. Not all the time, not frequently, at least in my case, although I'm quite certain that in other cases they were, and that those encounters, I'm trying to be as sanitized in the verbiage and the nounage that I'm using here. I don't want to be too explicit. That those encounters are at least sometimes enjoyable, that your kids actually seek them out. Now, maybe somebody's going to comment here and say, no, I never did that or anything like that. As vague as I'm being, I don't know how they can say no, that I just deny it, but that's kind of me. That's like a kid who says he never masturbates or never has. It seems, it's not impossible, but it seems rather unlikely. And here's the thing is, kids are doing stuff with themselves and with each other all the time. Every day, thousands and thousands. You're getting little boys sword fighting, little girls kissing each other, little guys and girls kissing each other and doing things, comparing things, stuff that if you were to witness would be overtly sexual. And there's not I don't hear a hue and cry about that. You know, I think a lot of it is people don't want to confront it. It's embarrassing, and it touches on a subject that they're unwilling to discuss. But that doesn't mean it's not happening, and it doesn't mean it's going away. And the thing is, there's no moral outrage about this happening. If it's being coerced, like if a child's being forced to do it, yes, then that's something to be outraged about. That's something to be aggressively against. But if there isn't any coercion happening and it's by choice, if it's the preference of the child, then I don't see any reason to be upset about it. And the other thing is, if we introduce a video or photographic record of that event happening, and that also is not coerced, then I don't see how the fact that it's recorded changes the moral dimension of the act at all. Recorded and distributed. So just as an example, let's say two little boys, and let's say, well, we don't even have to pick an age, and let's say they play with each other. Maybe they give each other, they do a little circle jerk, and they maybe give each other a little blowjob, which that does happen. Like, I don't know how frequently, but I know it does. And let's just say that they're not being coerced, that neither one of them is forcing the other one to do so. It's something that's a mutually enjoyable experience for both of them. All right? It is hard to see how this is morally terrible. Now let's change the element somewhat and just record it with a video camera. And let's assume that they aren't being forced into this recording, that somebody isn't holding a gun to their parents' head and saying, do this or I'll kill your parents or your brother or I'll hurt you or whatever. I don't see how that changes the moral dimension at all. If anything, the most terrible aspect of this, I think, from the anti-porn people is the sexual act itself, but the sexual act's happening anyway. So just to record it, and then here's the thing is they could even benefit by making money off of it. Now, I'm not saying most kids would be willing to go for that. I know in my case I was shy enough that there's no way I would have been comfortable with doing that, but I can imagine somebody who might have a different view on it. And I am willing to accept their subjective preference and assessment of the situation rather than to impose some puritanical notion of what's right or wrong for them onto them, which is the conceit of the people who are going to categorically and always say child porn is wrong. Now, that's not the case if you're saying, I don't think that they should be coerced or they should be fraudulently, tricked into recording, against, maybe putting secret cameras against their knowledge. Who cares? Yeah, all that's different. That's wrong. But, I also think it's just silly to just assume that those criteria, that any porn must be a result of manipulation or coercion. That's simply logically not the case. And when it's not the case, it's hard for me to see how you can get so upset about it. And this already started to happen. I'm probably about to get a letter from NAMBLA asking me to come speak at their event or something. And I'm too busy to do that. I never would have thought myself, becoming an advocate of NAMBLA. I don't know everything that NAMBLA stands for, so I can't say that that's the case. But it's interesting to me how absolutely taboo this subject is, to the point where it generates such vitriol and such strong reactions that I think so many of them are unreasonable. Like I said, there was a guy commenting that nobody under 25 who hasn't gone through rigorous sex education should be allowed to have sex, let alone to perform pornography. And I just think that's a silly. It's a silly rubric, one that's not met today, that really can't be met. So again, I hope this is addressing, I think, all the concerns that were raised, the physical ones, the ability to make decisions. And again, the title of my videos can't express the entire argument to be had. I'm not saying that child pornography is always okay. If there's any element of coercion It's not okay. If there's any element of fraud, it's not okay. If there is some kind of objective or relatively objective or at least useful methodology for determining the sentience of an individual to the point of whether they can make decisions or not, then I'm willing to examine that possibility, that probability actually, and apply that. And if we were to apply it, certainly many children would not be able to consent to having pornography done to them. Absolutely. However, many children, unless you have really narrow views of it, like only children is only really young kids, many children would be able to pass that test, in which case I don't see what the justification for opposing it can be. And I don't see what the justification then can be for opposing child porn, but then favoring public schools or welfare or single mother subsidy or circumcision, all of which are probably much worse than pornography is and or ever could be. So I hope I don't have to make another video on this topic, but when you have that much interest and that much discussion, I think it's worthy of another go-around. If anything, it's important to explore issues of autonomy and to at least talk. I think that a lot more intellectual and philosophical work needs to be done in this area, because I'm having a hard time even constructing a rubric that I can't tear down myself. You want something that can plausibly work, and if I have an easy time tearing it down or pointing out its potential for abuse and having that potential be very strong, then that's a very problematic methodology. But that's no less problematic, certainly not any more problematic than anyone under 18. Because the age of consent and the age of assertion, which I think is a little bit younger, is essentially reducing children to slavery, and not just to their parents. I mean, they're compelled to go to public education because of their youth. Once you get to a certain age, they can't tell you have to go to public school. They can tell you to do all kinds of other shit. They can tell you, mostly though, they just tell you what you can't do, not that you have to do this or that. And it's a travesty that this entire class of humans are just denied what are otherwise basic human rights just because of their age, and not because of their mental state, because there's no attempt to even measure that systematically. There's just, you're 18, you're a minor. And it even goes like 21. You can't drink until you're 21 in lots of places. That's absolutely ridiculous. So, I don't know. That's my thoughts on it, and I'll talk to y'all later. I'll probably be busy the next couple days, so I don't know when I'll be able to upload this, but alright, I'll talk to y'all later.